All right, so today we're going to be looking at changing out the front rotors on this BMW 650i because I'm getting some shaking when I'm braking, meaning that the steering wheel is shaking when I apply the brakes to stop. And so most likely that means that these rotors, and they got some miles on them, are probably getting a little warped to them, and so they're dragging in spots. So I'm going to get these things changed out because it's about due time. And here is about all we're going to need to change them out. So if you look on the floor there, you can see we got a C-clamp and some Allen wrenches, a hammer, we got a ratchet and a breaker bar and some sockets, because the biggest thing that you got to do to get the rotors off is you got to take the brakes off. But the brake caliper is only held on there with two big bolts, and they're 18 millimeters. So not hard to do, but they're a little bit hard to get off because they're on there pretty tight. But we're going to get set up and we're going to show how to do this. You'll probably need a little chair or something to put underneath there to hold your brake caliper up so it doesn't hang off of the hoses. But other than that, it's a pretty simple job, and we'll get set up here and show how to do it. Alright, so after you get the tire off, first thing you see is the big old rotor. Now the rotor is just sitting there and it'll come off. You just have to take one little bolt loose right here, and you can pull the rotor off the hub. It might be kind of fused on there from the rust and stuff. We'll have to knock it off there. But in order to get the rotor out, we got to get the caliper off. Now the caliper's only held on with two 18 millimeter bolts in the back here. So all we're going to do is take those bolts loose, and then we're going to set it over here on the side so we can pull the rotor off and get it replaced. We're also going to have to push the piston back on the caliper because the new rotor is going to be thicker than the old rotor because this one's worn. So we got to push the piston back in the caliper to make room for the brakes to slip back over the new rotor. So let's get set up, get these two bolts loose, and then we'll be able to slide the caliper back and we'll be able to take the rotor off real quick. So all we want to do is get our socket put back in here, and then we need to get us a breaker bar or something because they're really hard to get off. So we get us a breaker bar in there, and now we're going to have to knock that bolt loose. So you can hit it like that right there, and most times you can get them to start moving. And once you get them moving, you can just go to a ratchet. So they're on there pretty tight. We tighten them up pretty good. Don't know what the spec is, but you can look it up for these two bolts, but they're pretty tight. But once you get them moving with a breaker bar, you can switch over to a regular ratchet, and then you should be able to just ratchet those guys out of there. Alright, so there's one of the bolts that holds it on. Like I say, they're pretty big. They'll get torqued down pretty tight. I'll probably put them down with a hammer about as tight as they came off. So now we just got to get the second one off. Alright, so we got our bolts took out, and you can see the upper one is the shorter one, the lower one is the longer one. So now our caliper's free. It'll actually move around, so we got to get something underneath it to hold it up because we don't want it hanging off of its hoses and things. So that's where our little chair comes into play. So let's get our chair over here and we'll set this on top of that chair. Alright, so with our little chair in place right here, now we got some place to lay this down so it's not going to get impacted on the hoses. So now all we got to do is get the caliper off of the rotor. So the bolts are loose, but as you can see, because this rotor is worn, it's got a lip right here on the edge and it's holding those brakes. So we're going to actually have to pry that off there in order to get the brake to expand enough to get off the rotor. So let me go grab a screwdriver real quick. I'll slip it over the top and we'll pry it right off there. Alright, so with a big old screwdriver, what we want to do is just put it right in between the caliper and the rotor, and we want to pull back on the caliper to get it to hop over this bump right here. So as soon as you push on it just a little bit, it opens it up enough that it'll come off there. And as you can see, our caliper is getting freed up. So now all we got to do is just knock the caliper backward and we can set it free. So we'll just get it up on something so it can sit up there and not hang on those hoses, because that thing's pretty heavy. Now if you can see right here, my brakes are still good. I changed the brakes out a bit ago, so that's not an issue. I'm not going to change my pads out, but I do need to push this piston back in order to make room for the new rotor. But we'll do that in just a minute. Once we get this rotor off, we'll get it out of the way. Alright, so we're almost ready to take this rotor off. It's right in front of us. All we got to do is take this little bolt loose right here, and it is an Allen wrench. So we just got to find the right size Allen wrench right there, and then we're just going to knock that loose. Then we got to get our big old rotor off. So let me thump on that, and we'll spin that little bolt off. We're going to reuse this bolt right here, and there's our little bolt. So fortunately this rotor wasn't stuck on there because it's already slipped off. So just as simple as that, we've taken our rotor off, and if you can see on the angle right here, it's got a big lip on it where it's been wearing where the brakes were. This was the original size of the rotor. So it's about time we had to change this one out because it's got quite a bit of wear. Alright, so old rotor off, time for the new rotor. I'm just going to take a brush and I'm going to clean up this hub right here just to make sure it seats flat back against it. Then we're going to push that piston back in the caliper. We're ready to install it, and we'll be done with this side. Alright, so while we got the rotor out of the way, we got plenty of room to play with this piston. So we got to push this piston back a little bit to push our pad back up. Now you could just push on the pad if you wanted to, but you might risk damaging it. So what we'd like to do, if it's easy, we'll just push that pad out of there, and then we'll put it back in there in just a minute once we're done. So all you do is tip your pad down, and then you just unlock it out of the locks in the back by just pushing it down, and then we'll get it out of there. We can leave the other one, so if you need to, you can get a screwdriver and kind of pry on it a little bit to try to get it to pop down, and there you go. So that pad is held on by those little fingers right there. There's also a sensor that goes to this back pad. It's a wear sensor. So you may have to take this loose. If you have the sensor on it, you'll have to unhook that sensor and you can slide the pad out. So let's take this little sensor off real quick and get him out of the way. So it just hooks up on top of where you bleed the brake line. And then we'll just pick him up and wiggle him off. And then we'll have that sensor out of the way. We can reinstall it later. So we'll just get that guy loose up here. Get him a little free so we can pull that brake shoe out. And as you can see, the sensor connects to the brake shoe. Now you can pull that off and put it on a new shoe. I'm just going to leave it where it is because it looks like it's in okay shape. We just want it out of the way for a second so we can push up on this piston right here. Alright, so this whole mechanism moves, and as you can see I can move it up and down. What I want to do is get something in there and get a C-clamp on it so I can push that piston back. So I just got a big old washer. I'm going to put it right up inside right there, and then I'm just going to clamp it with a C-clamp, and I'm going to pull that piston back. So let's get us something here so we can clamp with. And what we're slowly going to do here is tighten up the C-clamp, and it's going to pull that caliper piston back up. And so I don't have to go far because my brakes weren't really worn that bad. But as you can see, as I turn real slow, it's pushing that piston back up inside of there. That's going to give me some space for my new rotor. Alright, so we got our piston pushed back up, so now we can put our brake back in and reconnect our little cable. So all of that goes pulling back up into the back. And then we connect up our shoe inside of here. And we just want to put it right back into the inside, and we're going to lock those little fingers back there back in place. So you get one finger in and then you push the other finger in and it pops back up inside of the piston. Move my chair over here a little bit. So now our brake is back in there. We can hook our little sensor back up right here, back on top of the bleeder, and we're in good shape. So now we got plenty of clearance right there for our new rotor. All right, so let's set this guy out of the way, and now we're gonna put our new rotor on. Then we'll spin that back around. All right. So to put our new rotor on, as you can see, there's one hole right here that's different. That's the little bolt that holds the rotor on there for us. We've already cleaned all this off. So now all we got to do is get our new rotor. And I got a slotted one this time versus the original ones that were flat. This one's drilled and slotted. And so it should stay a little bit cooler than the original. So now all we got to do is just put our rotor back on there. And there's our little bolt, right? So we get our little bolt, and we just want to line up that odd hole that's on the rotor, line it up to that one, and we'll bolt it back on there. And the main thing that little bolt is doing is just going to hold that rotor so when we take the tire off, the rotor doesn't fall off with it. It's not doing a lot. It just holds that rotor on there for us. So there we go. So we'll just give that little bolt a thump. Make sure he's tight enough. And now we're ready to flip our caliper back over, put it on our rotor, bolt everything back together, and we'll be done with this side, just putting the tire back on. So let's get it flipped back over, and away we'll go. So remember, the top bolt is the short one, and so we just got to flip our caliper back over, and then we just got to line up the holes. Now you can see how loose it is because I pushed that piston back. Makes it super simple to put together because it's nice and loose. Alright, so now we just got to tighten those two bolts up back to spec, put our tire back on, and we'll be ready to go with a brand new rotor. Alright, so there we go. Our rotor is back on and our caliper is back tight. So now what we got to do before we go to the other side is we got to hop in the car and we got to press the brakes to get the caliper to tighten back down. If not, when we squeeze the other side, we may push too much brake fluid up and it'll overflow the reservoir. So I'll hop in the car real quick, tighten these down, and then we'll be in good shape. Alright, so with our brake pedal pumped a few times, now when I rotate it, you'll hear it. Nice and consistent going around the rotor. The caliper's back tight again. So we can move over to the other side, do exactly the same thing, and we'll be done with our rotor swap. So super simple, not hard at all, only takes a few tools and makes a world of difference on that shaking that you feel when you're braking in your steering wheel. Well, alrighty, hope that helps someone, and thanks for watching. Alright, so just as a little extra for the video, I'm over on the passenger side. As you can see, this one is stuck on there. And so the other one came off pretty easy. But just a note, if you run into this to where one of them is stuck, since we're replacing the rotor anyway, you can go ahead and knock on the rotor and try to break it loose from the hub. So I'm just going to take what's left of my dead blow hammer and I'm going to smack around on these edges right here and see if I can't pop it free from that hub. So you just got to give it some raps like that right there. And one hit was all it took to get this one off because it wasn't too messed up. But if they're stuck on there really tight, you may have to hit here and here and here and here and here and kind of walk it around. But just as an extra note, just in case that one's stuck on there, that's all you got to do is just wrap it out on these edges and it'll pop it free.